First question, what you can say about the current situation in the European Union?
Ooh, how much time do you have? How many hours? Well, I'm among the optimists. I don't think that the crisis is over yet. And I think we may still have some difficult moments. There are some countries that are still clearly very troubled, but I think that so many astonishingly unlikely and good things have happened that I think that we may end up with a successfully reformed EU and, what is perhaps more important, reformed nation states as well.
Mm-hmm. Is it Germany now as a heart of Europe, or I can say
the superpower?
Yes.
It's okay, go ahead, say it. No, I think that that's a projection that has, like many projections, there's a reason for it, there's a kernel of truth, but I think it's also often exaggerated. I think that what has happened here is that Germany has become the lead nation in Europe by default. By default meaning because other powers who normally and in the past have led on these issues are not leading for very different reasons. The British because they are not sure whether their future lies within Europe or out of it, and the French because they are still engaged in domestic reforms. So the Poles, on the other hand, are being, if you will, indirect leaders by pairing with the Germans a lot, and are doing this very intelligently. The Germans themselves are very conscious that their leadership is due to luck and circumstance, and is by default. By luck, I mean, and there's an irony to this, we managed to undertake very painful, socially painful competitiveness reforms at a time when we had a social democratic chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, in power, who was then more or less ousted by his party and by the voters for having done this. But that is, by general consensus of The Economist, what saved us and what put us into a better place when the crisis began. Finally, Germans are very conscious that their economic success, and hence their political power, depends on their successful exports. And where do we export to? The Eurozone, the rest of the EU, the US and China. If any of those economies, go back into crisis and into recession, of course we are in trouble as well. Yeah? So this is highly contingent, highly circumstantial, but the Germans, being Germans, are trying to be reasonably responsible. And of course they are doing what they think is in their national interest and what they think is best for Europe. Yeah?
Is it a good idea for European Union generally and Germany in particular, this fresh idea of common trade zone with United States?
I think so, yes. It's not going to be easy to do because there are a lot of very complex regulatory problems, from the movie industry to the computer industry, where there are very powerful special interests who can probably with some ease prevent something like that from happening. The reason why I think the situation is different than in previous years when this was talked about but didn't happen is that the crisis has shown both the Europeans and the Americans their relative weakness with regard to other rising powers who are not democratic, who are authoritarian, and who use very different ways of gaining influence globally. So to some degree, and this is very important for the motivation behind this, we are all conscious of our relative weakness compared to earlier days. And that's true even for the Americans. Yeah, so I think there is a more urgent, a greater sense of urgency behind this.
Mm-hmm. And if you talk about Eastern dimension of European Union policy, in near future can be equality between Germany Eastern policy and EU Eastern policy?
Well, I don't think, there's one important difference that used to be there that has more or less disappeared, and that is this so-called special relationship with Russia. Mm-hmm. The German-Russian relationship, it has to be said, and you know this, is currently pretty bad. Mm-hmm. And the first ones to say this, and with some concern and anger, are the Russians themselves, who are very upset that their strategy of using Germany as the entry point, the spearhead into the EU, seems not to be working. The answer to that is, of course, it's their own fault. Georgia woke people up in 2008, the war. What I would call the self-re-election of Vladimir Putin, didn't help. And then the NGO laws, the searching of German party foundation offices in Moscow, and the fact that completely unimpeachably objective and professional institutions like the Levada Center are suddenly being called alien agents, is not helping. And anybody, I mean, it doesn't. It's opening people's eyes in Germany that this is a government that does not respect the civil rights of its own citizens. So, in other words, that's a really important point, and that this used to be a difference, and it used to be why the Germans were closer to the Russians and therefore appeared to be more distant towards Eastern Europe. The situation now is, I think that I'm not sure that it's a better situation, because, as you know, for example, German Belarus policy has been quite progressive. The German foreign minister, together with the Polish foreign minister Sikorski, went to Minsk together to make clear what they thought of the way that Belarusian civil society was being treated. They've tried to be very clear to Ukraine. They've tried to be very forward-leaning on Moldova. This is something the Chancellor herself was the first German Chancellor to visit Moldova. In other words, I would say there's been quite a lot of German activism, and the Germans, of course, have also been, to go away from the East for a moment and to go to the Balkans, the Germans also have been very instrumental in the brokering of the peace between Serbia and Kosovo. But the larger problem is, of course, that some of these situations are very, very difficult to manage. We saw how long Serbia and Kosovo took. We saw how long Croatia took before it got, on the path to EU membership. And Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, the Caucasus, all this is going to take a long time and a lot of strategic patience. But I'm feeling somewhat optimistic about that, because I think that now we are essentially in strategic agreement within the EU. I think we could do more, we could invest more, and I think we have to, because otherwise Russia's efforts at how do I put this, at rebundling, as somebody said today at the conference, at rebundling these countries and folding them back into Russia's sphere of influence will be successful, not because we want that to happen, but because we don't have the energy and the strategic resources to prevent it. And I don't want to see that happening, of course.